Welcome to Mental Health Monday. My name is Mick Coyle. Coming up on the programme this week.
It's so weird when you lose someone. For me, it feels like it was only yesterday, but then it feels so long since I last saw him.
There's sort of the time scale shifted, if you like, to allow you to place yourself in different parts of your life with him.
My grief hasn't got any smaller. It's got no bigger. You learn to live around your grief. It doesn't all of a sudden go, one day I'm going to wake up and go, oh, it was Tom. You learn to live with that. That's going to be with me till the day I die.
And I'll be reminding you how you can make connections with mental health organisations within your community. It's Mental Health Monday.
The home of the UK's conversation about mental health. Welcome to Mental Health Monday. An absolute pleasure, as ever, to have you with us. Here we are, mid-October. The number of people who've said to me this year, where is this year going? How is it October already? I say mid-October, it's mid to end of October, the way things are going. Yeah, absolutely. Flying by. I don't know if that's the thing as you get older. I'm in my 40s now, for my sins. And I really do notice that there's like big periods of time where I have to really think, like, what was I doing for that period of time when I was like 25, 26? And then equally, you'll sometimes hear about a thing that you thought was like 3 years ago. But then you remember, actually, no, 3 years ago, we're in the middle of the pandemic. And actually, the thing that you remember from 3 years ago was actually not 4 years ago, but like 8 years ago. Yeah, it's odd how your brain does that to you. But yeah, here we go. We crack on. Absolutely, 2023. That's part of the thing about being mindful as well, isn't it? The ability to try and be in one space at one time and appreciate it for what it is in that moment. To not think about the past or to think about the future, to think about the moment. And then hopefully, when you do get an opportunity to reminisce or feel nostalgic, you can actually then remember the specific things that you felt within that moment. Because when you were in that moment, you were having the time of your life, or you were really absorbing everything about that. I do that when I go on holiday, or if I go somewhere really nice. I always try and think, right, remember this now. This feeling of you with your feet in the sand or your bum on the wet ground, the top of a mountain. Try and remember this feeling, because later you won't be here, but you'll try and place yourself back here. I think we try and do that in life. And the thing that really strikes me about those sorts of things is how often it's different types of senses that bring it all back. I went to a gig last week, Blink-182, at the AO Arena in Manchester, and a couple of the songs came on, which I've not heard for a number of years. But it wasn't that I just remembered the song. I remembered where I was, when I first heard that song, and when I used to listen to that song, and I could picture the CD player, and I could picture the video game, and I could picture my old bedroom in my house when I was living with my mum and dad 25 years ago. Man, it's strange how your memories do that to you. The other thing is smells. How you'll smell something and you'll think, goodness me, this is like a smell from a bygone age. It's quite a strange thing. I remember once I hadn't been on holiday to Cornwall for a number of years, but we used to go all the time when we were kids. And when we went back, the smell of like the damp ferns when you're going down to the beach, that particular, very specific smell, isn't it, that? But that particular smell completely took me back. Not just to think, oh, I remember that smell, to I remember how I felt when I first ever smelt that. And it's strange that it's not just, the sight or the image of something. It's those other things that you're maybe not expecting, the sounds or the smells or whatever it is, that then makes you go, goodness me. I've got a thing as well with the drink dandelion and burdock. Is dandelion and burdock a thing that people know? As a kid, dandelion and burdock was like a drink that you had, but I always had it at my granddad's house, grandma and granddad's house. And I remember having it in those like big glass tankards that you get in the pub. I think they stopped selling them because they were being used too much in like fights and stuff. But you used to get a dandelion and burdock in that. And if I ever taste dandelion and burdock now, absolutely, I am drawn back to my grandma and granddad's house. Not as it is now, but as it was then. And that's taste doing its thing. Anyway, I went off on one slightly to kick off the podcast this week. Again, thank you to everybody who supported Leave a Light On. I really appreciate that. And I'll be coming back to that as a topic because I think it's a really important one. And thank you to everybody who's been getting involved in various other different stories, who've had ideas about topics or guests that we can speak to on the podcast. Always happy to hear from you. Keep those emails coming in. I popped all my details in last week's podcast in terms of how you can get in contact with the show. This conversation is a conversation I had a month or so ago now, but I've not had a chance to get it out as a podcast, but I wanted to bring it to you. And it's with Kelsey Parker. Now, Kelsey is the wife of Tom Parker, who is in the boy band The Wanted. And Tom sadly lost to a brain tumour 18 months ago. And Kelsey's been working on a project around grief and grief awareness, and around the fact that when someone dies, that we often don't like to talk about it. And actually that person's death can become the elephant in the room. Now, to actually represent this, there was a huge elephant, like literally an elephant, in a room that was placed by Tower Bridge in London, which was quite an eye-catching thing. I'll put a link to it in the article that I've put in the podcast notes. But it really did bring to life to the fact that, yeah, absolutely, there is an elephant in the room. More than half of us consider death to be a taboo subject. More than half of us would hesitate discussing it. Often worried that we'll say the wrong thing when talking about grief. And this can be grief in a million and one different reasons. There are many ways why people die, and at many stages of their life as well, as we've been hearing, of course, in previous projects, that people get ill before their time, that people live to a ripe old age. But of course, it can be terribly sad when they go. And this can be people, it can be pets as well, that people feel a great sense of grief around. And it's almost that conversation we don't have as a nation, how to respond when somebody dies. Although arguably when the Queen died, that was a better representation about how a period of mourning is often required so that people can go about their lives and actually take the time to grieve, but also feel confident in being able to talk about it and discuss that grief if they feel it. So Kelsey is a brilliant talker, a brilliant guest, and I wanted to bring you this conversation in full. We start off by talking about her experience, having lost Tom 18 months ago.
Yeah, literally I'm sat at Tower Bridge in front of an elephant in the room, because it is the elephant in the room. People don't want to talk about grief. They don't want to talk about loss. People used to cross the street when Tom first passed away because they couldn't actually approach the conversation about Tom dying. And for me, I wanted to talk to these people. I wanted to celebrate Tom. But I just think as a nation, we are awful at talking about grief, about death, about loss, because I think we're also worried that you might say the wrong thing, but there's no wrong or right way to approach it, or there's no wrong or right thing to say.
What's that like, that when you can see that people are deliberately avoiding you? I don't think through malice or anything like that, but they always just think it's just easier not to say anything.
And people think it's easy to say like nothing than just be like, hi, how are you? I'm really sorry for your loss. Like saying I'm sorry for your loss is not going to get anyone's back up. Like, then that opens that conversation to say, don't be sorry. Like, I had a wonderful life with Tom. It was cut too short, but, we had an amazing, amazing 13 years together. And I want to talk about Tom, and he's the father of my children.
Do you think in terms of that process that you're going through, maybe what were those sorts of feelings and emotions that you were having during that time that you wanted to share? Were there things that you wanted to say about what you were going through?
I did also want to say to people, like, this is the one thing we're all guaranteed in this lifetime, is we're all going to die. So let's just talk about it, because we are all actually going to die.
There's this survey has found that 58% of people consider death to be a taboo subject, and yet it's the only inevitability that we have in life. You sometimes hear, don't you, about
like anything goes. You don't know if you're going to keep your job for the next 10 years, but you ultimately know that you are going to die at some point.
You hear, don't you? There's the movie Coco where, they sort of focuses on like Mexicans, and in Mexico, they seem to have this thing where they have like celebrations of death and the fact that people have died as well. And to me, that feels like a really big cultural leap, but we could make that leap if we chose to. We almost we'd almost sort of sit back and kind of do things our own way, because if you mention it, people think you're a bit strange, or that, well, why do you want to celebrate something which is sad?
Yeah, and it's like that. We've sort of, especially here in the UK, we have got that like stiff upper lip, haven't we? Even just how, like me, I'm 33 and a widow. It's like how we think a widow should look like and behave. And I didn't think I was going to be a widow at 33. I didn't think I'd be here talking about grief and loss at 33, but I am. So we do just need to embrace that conversation and have the celebrations. Like, even for me, like Tom's funeral, I was like, I wanted to, like, one of my notes in it was, where's some sparkle? Like, let's jazz it up a bit, because let's celebrate his life. This is not a day to mourn him. Let's celebrate him.
In terms of your experience, Kelsey, and the sort of the emotions that you felt, I heard a quote which really struck with me about loss was that grief is love that has nowhere to go, which always struck me as quite a good way of almost explaining what grief was. And I felt like in hearing that, it made a little bit more sense to me about why grief matters and actually why grief happens. And actually, it isn't something that we should be necessarily scared of, because it's a representation of the love you feel for somebody.
Yeah, and it is the price you pay for loving that person. Like, that is it. And I think people, like, they go, oh, after the funeral, it will hit them. It will hit them. And I used to always say, it hit me the day he died, and I've never felt, I'm never going to feel the same. But, my grief hasn't got any smaller. It's got no bigger. You learn to live around your grief. Like, it doesn't all of a sudden go, one day I'm going to wake up and go, oh, it was Tom. Like, you learn to live with that. That's going to be with me till the day I die. But I'm learning to live around my grief now.
Obviously, you guys have got so many sort of memories, and Tom's legacies, is clear for all to see. What for you is it like that? The physically he's not there anymore. The physicality of him in the house, or even when you reach over in the bed in the morning. What's that like? How can you is he able to put that into words? What that difference is?
No, it is really hard to put into words. You just miss their presence, and I miss Tom so much being in the house, and coming in. He used to always come out of his best ideas in the shower and come out and be like, oh, I've got an invention, I've got an idea. Like, you've missed them little things about that person. But that's why we should talk about it, because I want to celebrate him and I want to talk about him.
I spoke to Max from the band after Tom's passing, and obviously Max was absolutely devastated. And it struck me as well, though, in terms of the things that people were saying to him. And Max has had his own issues around sort of his mental health and things like that. It was really open and honest. But it struck me as well that when somebody who is of high profile passes, that there's people think they know that person or they know a version of that person. But then obviously you see that very, very personal side of, it's just him. It's not the pop star. It's not the guy, the posters on the wall and all. There was a quote from, it was one of John Lennon's kids. And he was saying that people would come up to him and go, your dad meant everything to me. Your dad was the best thing that ever happened. He's the most important person in my life. And he was going, hang on a minute. Like, I appreciate you're a fan of my dad's music, but like, he was the guy who literally put food in my mouth. And he was saying that he couldn't quite get his head around that difference between people's thoughts and memories of someone on a stage, or if you like, versus that very real sort of sense of that as well. You must get that mix when people come and talk to you.
But I do love people talking about him. The Tom I had at home was the completely different Tom that other people saw. But I'm just willing to like embrace, stories about both Toms. When someone passes, you sort of put them on the pedestal as well, that they were like a stage. But I'm like, no, Tom did have faults as well. Like, we've all got faults in life. It is that talking about him. I mean, but I didn't know he did that. Yep, he did do that.
In terms of Tom, and obviously being ill, and you obviously saw various different stages of that. As time has passed, and it's only a very short period of time, that 18-month period of time, does that change the way that you think of him or how you remember him? As sort of the time scale shifted, if you like, to allow you to place yourself in different parts of your life with him?
It's so weird when you lose someone. Like, for me, it feels like it was only yesterday, but then it feels so long since I last saw him. So I think you just shift through the emotions. And I think it's definitely the conversations you're having. Like, I might be talking about the birth of the children, and I'm like, oh, Tom did this, and it was so funny. Like, you sort of jump through the stages of his life.
And with that in mind, do you find that there's still that presence there? That although it's it's memories from the past, that you feel like somebody's with you on that journey, or their legacy stays with you?
Yeah, I definitely think as well, for me, having the children, because, Tom's still very present in the house. He's like, belongings are still there, and we've got pictures everywhere of him. So, and especially with the kids, I want to keep his memory alive. So we do talk about him every single day.
When the kids do something that's very top, do you
just
see
like
it?
Your dad?
But do you? There must be, and I've not had experience of that, but there must be a thing where you go, oh, there he is. Like, that's him right there. And it might be a look, or it might be a phrase or something like that. Is that something you recognise?
And I do think it's going to be interesting with them growing up because it's going to be nature or nurture. Like, what is actually Tom born within them? And Bodhi's definitely his stubbornness. He just like drops off, and that is so Tom.
And in terms of that conversation, we talk about grief with the kids as well. Is that is making sort of dad part of everyday conversation the way that you normalise and help them deal with the fact that he's physically not there?
Yeah, and my little girl's just started school, and I've had to say to her, other people in your class are gonna have mummies and daddies, and you just need to be honest and say that your dad's not here and why he died, and don't ever be ashamed or afraid to say that. But she almost is the elephant in the room because they're so young. She'll just say to people, "Oh, did you know my dad's dead?" And people go like, "Oh, I don't want to talk about this." And she go, "Yeah, died of a brain tumour." And especially when the Queen died, she'd be like, my dad and the Queen are together. They're up in the sky together. Like it made it easy because we've been so open about them conversations. It made it easier when the Queen died, when we lost my granddad, for them to understand what death is and what it looks like. Because where Tom went away so much, I think they thought he was going to come back. And I was like, Daddy's not coming back.
Sure. And I think that when the Queen died, we had this period of mourning, didn't we, where we gave ourselves permission to sort of grieve, didn't we? Almost like a 2-week period. Of course, you don't often get that. A lot of people, somebody dies, you take the afternoon off and then you get the day off for the funeral and then you're sort of back into life and it's expected. I can ask you, just in terms of taboos as well, you used the phrase before about a widow. I just wonder, when you were growing up, when you thought of what a widow looked like or your perceptions of that one as well, I wonder if that sort of changed now. You use that sort of language yourself now, whereas actually that sort of almost feels like an old Victorian way of describing somebody who's lost someone, but then it can be a modern and an appropriate thing as well for the modern day.
Yeah, I mean, it's a weird word, isn't it? Widow. It's like, I'm 33 and I'm a widow. Like, maybe that word needs to be changed, but hey, that's a different topic, isn't it? Yeah, it's just I never saw myself here. And you do think of a widow as like a lady in their 80s, 70s, 80s have lost the husband and in mourning. And now you see me in a pink jumpsuit at 33 being a widow.
And when people sort of talk about Tom, do they ever ask you, how are you? And I'll ask you the question now, how are you? How are you getting on just that day to day?
I just think you learn to live with your grief. So, for me, it's about just pushing forward and living each day because, Tom said this, we're not promised tomorrow. So live each day and enjoy every moment. And I always say to people, I'm like, it's just not that deep. It's not that deep. Don't worry about them little niggles in life.
That's great advice. Kelsey, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. I'm going to get some pictures up online as well so people can check out the elephant in the room or the elephant by Tower Bridge as well. Thank you so much for speaking to us. We wish you all the best and speak to you soon.
Thank you so much.
I hope you've enjoyed this week's podcast. Thanks for checking out Mental Health Monday. My name is Mick Coyle. You can find me on Twitter at Mr. Mick Coyle. You can also find me, Mick Coyle, on Facebook as well. Don't forget, if you want to speak to somebody about your mental health, you can do so. The Samaritans, free to call on 116 123. You can find mental health services where you are. Just look for the Hub of Hope. Type in your postcode. It'll find those mental health services close to you. And for support in a crisis, you can text SHOUT to 85258. That's if you're experiencing a personal crisis, you're unable to cope and need support. Shout to 85258. That's a text line. Do get involved in those services. In an absolute emergency, always remember the number to call is 999. Thanks for downloading the podcast this week. We'll be back next week with more Mental Health Monday.